Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'm Carl Frank, President of ANI Wealth Management. It's a pleasure to have you today. This is going to be a blast. All of you in the room already know we are recording this, but we're not recording you. So this camera in front of you is not on. But we do have three gentlemen on a Zoom today that are going to be talking with us. And so everybody in the audience out there in Zoom land, please, we want your questions. Our speaker is brilliant. He prefers an interactive conversation. Use the chat menu. If you haven't used chat on Zoom, at the bottom of the bar, you're going to see some green buttons, and one of them says chat. Just type your question in there at any time you want. And Cassidy, who's really running this in the back of the room right now, looking at me right now and smiling, giving me some positive energy, says she'll ask the questions whenever appropriate. So, please fire away. Please make this interactive. We're excited to do this. Let's see, what else should I announce before we go? Topic, we're going to talk about artificial intelligence and what it means for your investments and your future. I'm going to introduce Frank Castigliola from Barron Funds. Frank is going to introduce Ashim Mehra, who will be doing most of the presenting today. Ashim is one of the portfolio managers there. Frank joined Barron Capital in 2016. As an investment specialist, he was named a regional director for our type of business in this part of the country. We're lucky to have him. He's moved here to Colorado. On a personal note, Frank got engaged very recently. I think he's the lucky guy. We had dinner with the two of them not too long ago, and they're a wonderful couple, starting their family here in Colorado. He graduated from Penn State University a number of years ago, so he's no slacker for intelligence either. So please fire away with questions. Frank is going to be our moderator. I'm going to put our room on mute, and then we'll just ask questions, and Cassidy will take us off mute whenever we're ready to go. So without any further ado, Frank Castigliola, please take it away.
Thanks so much, Carl. Really appreciate it. It's really a pleasure to be on today's call, and thank you to the whole A&I team for having us. Really excited about the discussion today on artificial intelligence, and it's my pleasure to introduce Ashim Mehra. You may see that he has Will Van Allen under his name, but it's the gentleman with the Barron Capital background is Ashim. And just a brief introduction for Ashim. He joined Barron Capital in 2011. He is a portfolio manager of the Barron Technology Fund, has 25 years of research experience, and truly is an integral part of our firm's research when it comes to artificial intelligence. So I would certainly think about him as an expert in the field. Welcome, Ashim. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks, Frank. Thanks for having me, Carl, Frank, and the rest of the folks there that I can't see but can hear, I think. So I just really welcome the opportunity. I know that everyone's on a slightly different page. I'm celebrating this week my 13-year anniversary with Barron, and for the last 2 years have been managing the Barron Technology Fund, co-managing it with my partner in crime, Mike Lippert. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak about what, literally I read, eat, sleep, and dream about these last few months, if not the last year and a half, which is artificial intelligence and the impact that it already is having and the impact that it will continue to have in our world. I think it's not an understatement to say that I think this is, and we can go to the next slide if you don't mind, William, that this will be, the most profound change. I think the next 10 to 20 years will bring more change than the last 30, 40, 50 years. I can't underline how profound I believe these changes will be. Obviously, I'm not the only one. The luminaries such as Bill Gates and Jensen think the same thing. But I think just before we get started, to level set, what is AI? What is artificial intelligence? Ultimately, AI is a technology enabler. It is something that enables computers and machines, effectively the same thing, to simulate human intelligence and problem-solving capabilities. In its simplest form, you're teaching machines to think and to think like humans. And there's a lot of similarities in the the terminology that is used that is similar to, you might hear the terms training and inferencing, and we can go into that. But how we think about how we teach children and how they regurgitate and how they kind of answer back questions to us in time. The next page, real quick, if any of you have not seen it or not used it, if you have time, when you have time, try out ChatGPT. If you want something that is cheaper and free, there's a company called Perplexity. You can go to perplexity.com. It's a complex name to spell, but it's Perplexity. And then the other one, you can go to something called Mosaic within Google. So I think it's mosaic.google.com. Those are all different, what we call models, but effectively different interfaces to interface with different companies, chat bots, if you will, so far. So the ChatGPT moment that happened last year really opened, I think, the general consumer, but also investors' minds about what is possible with this technology. And what I hope to do today, and interrupt me at any point, please, what I hope to do today is give you the very basic tenets of what the AI infrastructure stack, or what the AI infrastructure from an investor perspective or from a technology perspective looks like. We can then take the conversation anywhere you want in terms of applications, how we're investing against it, or how we expect a multitude of things to change in time. Okay, next slide. So this is the slide we're going to spend the majority of the time. When we talk about artificial investment from either technology or investment perspective, these are the areas that we are discussing. The very base of all artificial intelligence is based on semiconductors, right? Semiconductors go into these are chips that come from NVIDIA, that come from AMD, from Broadcom and others. These chips go into these systems. And there was something very profound that happened. And this is a little technical, bear with me if it is. I just want to make sure you kind of understand what happened with AI. There was something called a transformer. And this is what allowed generative intelligence, and also what allowed ChatGPT to really take place, and how they figured out that these chips called GPUs, which is short for graphical processing units. So NVIDIA used to make these GPUs for video games, for high-end graphics, for CAD drawings, things like that, CGI animation, so on. A transformer, effectively, what it is a model that takes patterns in large amounts of text, right? Now it can be video and other formats as well, to understand and generate human-like text. And the way it does it is that it takes all these characters, these text words that are grouped together, and it creates numbers and then creates tokens. You sometimes hear about the word tokens. And then it creates correlations. So at the very core, and we'll talk about this when we get to models, what AI does is it creates correlations. So we'll get to that. So semiconductors, starting there, that is the GPUs, that is the base, that is what everything is built on. It is the pillar on which all artificial intelligence is going to be built. And the speed at which new compute and new chips are coming out is increasing. There are a lot of companies involved in that ecosystem. NVIDIA is the one you hear the most often, and they are the furthest along. Okay?
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Real quick, if I can step in here for just a moment, taking a bigger picture for a second. You started at Baron Capital in 2011. What a lot of folks on this call have investments in Baron Capital. They may or may not know that we focus on secular durable trends, right? Machine learning, advancements in healthcare, digitization. So taking a bigger picture of your background, and we can get back to the stack here in a moment, but starting in 2011, when you joined Baron, can you maybe highlight a little bit in regards to what your research was focusing on, and essentially how we got here today talking specifically about artificial intelligence? Can we maybe just start there in regards to your background and the research, how that has evolved.
Yeah, that's fair. So I joined Barron to lead our internet research, and that means following companies like Amazon and Google and Facebook, now known as Meta, and DoorDash, and many others, right? So what we over time, about 3 years ago, I approached Ron and sort of my co-portfolio manager and said, look, we have been investing in technology at Barron for 30 years. We have 12 dedicated investment professionals to this sector. We basically carved out our history in technology investing and saw that it had significantly outperformed our peers and the benchmarks. And we saw that there were very active, strategies and passive ones, and that our performance was better than that because of what the three tenets of Barron is. Barron is focused on long-term, right? And to be a long-term investor, to hold stocks for multiple years, you have to be focused on what is their competitive advantage. Competitive advantage, and AI is a game changer, but competitive advantage in technology specifically is about the rate of change. How quickly can you innovate? How quickly can you bring products to market? And AI is going to accelerate all of that, and not just for the technology sector, but for almost every sector, including healthcare. And the other thing we focus on is exceptional management teams, right? We really look for managers that we can own, that we can back, for many years. There's companies like CoStar, which we've owned for 15 plus years. Companies like Gartner, but also companies like Amazon, which I've owned since I joined this firm 13 years ago. So, those are the durable companies that we look for. But we have to keep checking. We have to keep doing work that these competitive advantages remain. In the context of AI, these things are changing at a faster rate. So the work and the rate at which data and information is coming to us is also changed dramatically. I'll say one last thing, and we'll get to kind of how we got to the tech fund. The other thing when we launched the tech fund was we looked at kind of active versus passive, and we just felt that the rate at which AI is going to accelerate is going to change the ability for passive funds to be able to keep up with those level of changes. I think this year is a perfect example. You're seeing real bifurcation among names like Apple and Tesla and Google versus Microsoft and Amazon and Nvidia, right? That is healthy. That is healthy to see. But what that is also saying is that the market is starting to understand that certain companies are going to benefit in the near term in a more meaningful way than other companies. And that's showing up in earnings, that's showing up in the competitive advantage, and it's showing up at the pace of innovation and how quickly some of those companies are investing in AI and how quickly they will see a return in AI. So we launched the fund 2 years ago. I would say a very large percentage of our fund is, correlated to this theme. And then I would lastly say that just as we look forward, one of the things that Barron, as all of you know, has been exceptionally good at is at small cap, and we have roughly 20% of the fund in small cap. I don't know if that's what you wanted me to spend time on, Frank, but that's kind of a update on how we got here today. And really, ChatGPT launched in November of 22 was a seminal moment for us, both as fund managers, analysts, anyone in technology to delve really deep into this area really fast. And just one piece of background, we went to see Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, in 2018, and with Ron, and had the opportunity to spend a full day with him. I think one of the most transformative days, of my experience at Barron, maybe as an investor, he was talking about, we called it machine learning. He was talking about machine learning and AI in 2018, before the launch of any of this. And after the 2022 crypto crash, we were fortunate enough to build a meaningful position in NVIDIA because we always wanted to, but the valuation had not been, where we wanted it to be. So before the launch of ChatGPT, we were already meaningful investors in NVIDIA and this theme. Okay, so where we are today, back to semiconductors. So semiconductors are the base layer. Think of that as the foundation. Who uses semiconductors? The largest users are Amazon with their AWS cloud business, Microsoft with their Azure business, Google with their GCP business, where they are selling this. But also companies like Meta. So if any of you have, regardless of kind of personal opinion on Meta as a company, and if any of you have used Reels or have children or grandchildren that have TikTok, the algorithm that decides what video, I call it a mind virus, and I don't always mean it in a complimentary way, but that algorithm is developed by AI. They look at what videos you view, for how long you view them. They break that video into multiple characteristics, and then they give you more of those kinds of videos. That is AI. That is why Meta is one of the largest buyers of, actually is the largest buyer in the US of NVIDIA chips. And that is one use case, of very tangible use case. And what they have seen is that time spent on Reels for Meta has gone up 10% because the algorithm has gotten so much better. So it has a tangible return for them. Now they're also doing things like creating advertising copy, or making an ad is becoming easier and easier to do, because, or they can show that the right person sees the right color or the right copy that is something that they're more inclined to click on, right? So that's the most tangible example today, one of the most. I can talk about others that we have today of AI in use that's driving a tangible economic return to a business. But again, I started this with cloud infrastructure, and so the biggest users are AWS, Meta, what we call hyperscalers, but Meta, AWS, Microsoft, so on, and Tesla is another one. Okay, then is the data layer. So in order to use we'll talk about models in a second, but in order to use artificial intelligence, you have to have your data. And you have to have your data, not just, most companies either keep their data what they call on-prem, which means on-premise, or they keep it on the cloud. So I would say something like 20% of enterprises have, 20% of enterprise data, which just means large companies' data, sits on the cloud on average. So the first thing they have to do to actually leverage AI is to accelerate their movement of data onto the cloud. So they have to move it all to where the GPUs, where the chips actually sit. And that is the phase under which companies are going to today, and why we believe AWS and Amazon and Microsoft are so well positioned, right? So the companies are just starting to figure out where their data is. Very often sits in a lot of different silos. Think about your own business. You might have customer data sitting in one silo. You might have account data sitting in another silo. You might have portfolio data sitting, or subset of fixed income data sitting in another silo. How do you consolidate that data so that the actual machine can look through all of that and build correlations? At the end, and we're going to talk about this next, is models. When I think about AI, when I think about models, and we'll talk about what they are, I think of AI as a correlation engine. That's the term I use the most, because what AI does is it looks at correlations just like the human mind does. So, if I say traffic, you say light, right? There's a correlation, and that index of that correlation is high. So when a model is, another word for this is learning language model, a model just ingests, takes all this data. So think of all the world's text in the case of a chat GPT, and it looks at all the correlations between words, right? So it might say black, and the next correlation may be white. It might say night, and the next correlation be sky. But it looks at all the correlations it can find everywhere, and then it scores higher correlations. And then when you ask it a question, it bases the answer based on the correlations that it's built. So it can only be as good as the data and the correlations that you have put into the model. And today there are two types of models. One are called foundation models. You think of these as the very largest of large language models. So that would be OpenAI, that would be Google Mosaic, that would be Anthropic, maybe one that you've heard of that AWS has an equity stake in. Llama is an open source one that Meta is working on. So there's about 5 or 6 of these very, very large, what we'll call foundational models. Mistral is another open source one. And then there are lots of these smaller learning language models. So for example, we have an investment in an online travel company where they have a learning language model for air. So all the air routes and pricing and data sits inside this one learning language model. And then they have another one for car rental. And then they have another one for hotels. And those models are then updated on a very regular basis, but that they are very specific to either an industry case or a use case. And sometimes you can buy some of these smaller models off the shelf from different providers. Okay, so that's the learning language model. The learning language model builds the correlations, but the companies that ultimately are the applications, think of that as Outlook is an application, Teams is an application, OpenAI, or the one I was talking about earlier, Perplexity. These are also applications. So the applications are either direct to consumer applications or they're businesses. So for example, you might have heard of a company called Workday. Workday does a lot in the HR and finance area. It's kind of like an SAP for that in that area. So Workday is now building learning language models inside of its applications so that if you are recruiting and you have a job applicant, instead of writing the whole requirements for that job, it will come up with a first draft of that job. So it knows based on the 50 other times you've written that you're hiring a recruiter, this is what a recruiter requires, and here are the requirements. So you're going to see both business and consumer applications leverage these models and these forms of AI. And ultimately, all of this goes to the user, right? Whether it's a business user or a consumer, this is how you will use it. So I use it often. If I'm writing something, I want to make it better. I'll say, make it better. I'll give it different prompts in terms of ChatGPT, and I'll say, make this more sincere, or write this at the level of a college student. And depending on what it is, for me today, that's the most basic use I use of these models. But there's also ways to do summarization. So Bloomberg, for example, when I want to look at earnings and I want to look at maybe I have a night where 3 companies reported and there's 3 others that I don't own, but I want to know what they said. They'll be able to summarize those transcripts and tell me here's what they said. Now, I'm not sure I'm quite 100% comfortable with this quite yet, but I think that'll be the next journey on AI, is the level of comfort and the level of quality that the model has and that you get over time, that you start to trust it. I think that's still happening and kind of in real time as we speak. So that's a very basic overlay of what artificial intelligence, the way we think about it is. We can go into, we have a few more slides, but we don't have to go into them and didn't plan to, but we have them for reference to talk about how different companies are impacted, how we're thinking about this from an investment perspective. But virtually every company, that is around today will be impacted by these models and what they're doing. And it will accelerate technology. It will accelerate people's movement to the cloud. And there are questions about efficiency and jobs that I think are not fully answered, but that the early indications are this, over the long term, this will be a very disruptive, I believe, this is a personal belief, that this will be very disruptive to certain types of employment, maybe, the efficiencies it will bring and the pricing that people might have to offer. It will make people a lot more productive, but does that mean you can charge the same for your services, or do you charge differently for your services? So there's a lot of open questions as well. Anyway, I spend all day and night and more time than I have thinking about it, reading about it, and I'm really here for a resource to you. So why don't we open it up and see if you have questions, which I'm almost certain all of you will.
Okay. great presentation. I mean, basically what I figured out is from what you said, but also from what I thought before, there are two types of companies in AI. They're the scientists and they're the engineers. The scientists are the ones that develop the science and how AI can work. The engineers are what you were talking about. These people are using it, everybody's using it, and how it's used. I also wondered, well, yeah, all these companies use that to improve profitability, but how does that help me as the investor? That's one question. The other question is, well, the other general question is, since you're in this, can you give us the 5 top companies that are in the science of AI, and then maybe 5 or 10, since there seems to be a lot more on the engineering of it. You said Amazon, Meta, but I mean, what are the companies that are really 80% of their business is in this area, the science and the engineering? Because I'd like to know what kind of companies I can invest in outside of the A&I window. You understand my question?
I just want to make sure I understand the science versus the engineering. So the way you're just your verbiage, I just want to make sure that I frame it correctly. So for you, the science are the people who are building the technology, and the engineers are the people who are using the technology as an for example, what I was talking about at the application layer. Is that a fair summarization?
Yeah. Sure.
Okay, I'm happy to do that. Okay, so I think a couple of thoughts there. So how are companies, your first question was, how are companies going to benefit the investor? So a couple of ways, right? The first,
who are 5 companies that are in the science of AI?
Yeah.
Versus,
well, I would first point you to the Barron Technology Fund, because that's exactly how we think about it, right? The science of it, to use your verbiage, are companies like NVIDIA, right? They are the semiconductor base layer. That's one of our top positions. The companies like AMD, right? It's another semiconductor companies. Companies like Broadcom. These are companies building the science. Without their chips, you cannot have all these benefits, right? Then there are companies that are, or TSMC, which is the company that makes 85% of the world's leading semiconductors get made in Taiwan or owned by this Taiwanese companies called TSMC. So those are kind of the core in terms of the engineering. But also, you could argue that the hyperscalers, the Amazon's AWS, Microsoft, both of them have more than one part of their business. But a big part of both Microsoft and Amazon's business is their cloud business, where they provide these capabilities, the ability to use these GPUs. So someone has to make them, but then someone has to provide the infrastructure for all the data for you to actually be able to use them as an enterprise. So those would be the Amazons and the Microsoft. Those are, Amazon, Microsoft, NVIDIA are 3 largest positions, and Broadcom is 4th. So that's kind of how we think about it, and I think that I'm answering your question there. In terms of the applications and the engineers, to use your language, the biggest company right now is, in our estimation, Meta, because they are the furthest along. They're buying these chips the fastest. They have a return that's very tangible and real today. So Meta is our 5th largest position. So clearly that's exactly how we think about it. And then there are not a ton of companies today that are showing what they can do with the AI that are public. I think in the next 6 months and 9 months, you will see a lot of that. Microsoft will be one of those. Amazon, again, will be one of those. So they benefit from both this being a science and the engineer. But there are others. And Some of those we are, diligencing right now. We own companies like Spotify. It's not an obvious AI play to people, but we believe what they're doing some things that they haven't announced yet in terms of audiobooks, in terms of using their ad ecosystem, that we think will be very interesting and all enabled by AI. So there's a broader range of companies like the Trade Desk that we own that are benefiting from AI, Workday, and others. And so we think there are a multitude of companies, but if you look at the top 10 names in our portfolio, they're all very highly positioned against those two themes, the way you characterize them.
I'll just say one final thing and I'll shut up.
Please.
Two final things.
Don't have to shut up, but
So Barron has an AI fund.
no, we have a technology fund. But if the
All right, so would the technology fund, would some of them be heavily weight in AI?
Look, it's the most prevalent theme for the next. We are in the first year. I'll just very quickly, I can't help myself. If you look at technology versus the S&P, just look at NASDAQ as one example. Over the last 10 years, the NASDAQ has compounded 18% a year, the S&P at 10, semiconductors at 25. Those are staggering numbers. So 800 basis points of outperformance versus the S&P, and even more if you were in semiconductors, right? So
you're saying AI is still in its infancy.
I am saying I can't predict the next 6 months. Maybe these stocks have gone up. Maybe they need to come in. I'm not saying, but I'm saying if you have a multi-year view, which I do, I'm the largest investor, I still think today in our technology fund. If you have a multi-year view, if you have a 5-10-year view, we are in the first inning of AI. Okay, the stocks have maybe appreciated the first and second inning, but we are still very, very early in the long-term trend that is AI, and the benefits are going to accrue in the years to come. So yes, and our fund is very leveraged to this theme because it is the most prevalent, highest conviction theme to me in all of investing right now. So yes, our technology fund is not an AI fund, but is it positioned like one? Sure, yes, it is. But that does not mean 100% of the fund and every company in it is today benefiting from AI. But very long.
And the last thing is, 3 days ago, I'm posting something on Facebook. I mean, you have to relate it to the lowest forums like myself. And so I wrote something about somebody leaving here, and well, anyway, bang, it revised me. Some kind of AI was used, and it rewrote what I wrote in my paragraph. And boy, I sure sounded a lot smarter than I did when I wrote that. So that's my last comment. I don't know who did that to me. But
You're not the only one. I'll give you two anecdotes. I have a lot of skills. I'm an engineer by training. I am not the best writer. Mike Lippert, who's my co-portfolio manager, is a lawyer by training. He's an excellent writer. Last quarter, we have to do our quarterlies. He said, wow, your section of the quarterly was really good. I go, well, I giggled and I said, well, Mike, I had a little help. And he goes, what do you mean? I said, well, I may have used ChatGPT to help me write certain parts of it. And so you're not alone. And on another note, this is maybe more information than you need. My wife gave me her phone 2 nights ago and said, this couple that we're very good friends with asked us to go away for their 20th anniversary to Jamaica. And how do I say no very politely? And I said, give me a minute. And I had GPT. I literally told ChatGPT, how do I politely say no to a blah, 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 and it gave me a response. And it was too formal, but my wife took, 60, 70% of it and said, thanks. So, these are, one of them is very practical for work. One of it is not, but I think these are the seedlings of things to come. There's a company called Klarna. I don't know if any of you have heard of it, but it is a buy now, pay later type of service, Square acquired a company called Afterpay that does the same thing. So Klarna recently put out a case study where they had 2,500 customer service representatives offshore working part-time, so it's not full-time. And they took 75% of that workload and have an AI doing it with equal, if not better, efficacy, and dramatically I think it's 1,000th the cost. So these are just little looks into the future, but it will make us better. It will make us efficient. I visited with a company this week, and they said, "Look, we are taking some of the work that we used to do manually. We've now put in the AI. The AI is now doing it, and now I'm making those people do higher level jobs. I am asking them to think more, to make more judgment decisions versus doing more manual work." And I think that's where the world is heading. So it's a very fair and good question.
Thank you.
Got a question. When I think of AI, I think as a business owner, how will this help me? And it sounds like, I can see it save me a lot of time. I can see it making us more efficient, more profitable. But you probably get to hear a lot of ideas on creative uses of AI. I'd be curious to hear what maybe the most creative idea around AI, looking at it from a lens that the folks here in this room we've never thought about. Like, how will it affect us in a way we've never even thought about?
So there is a video use case that I'm just starting to see. And I am basically, it's called, there's an AI model called Sora, okay? And Sora is part of OpenAI. And what they have is a video from text. So you could go to, if you have an OpenAI account, which I do, you could go to Sora and say, create me a video of New York City in the 1920s. Okay, and literally it will create you a video of Manhattan in the 1920s. You can imagine what that could do to movies, right? And video games. The creation of content, video content, is a very creative use case that I believe will alter. And it's they've already given it to Hollywood makers. Those makers are now playing with it and seeing what they can do with short videos. But you can see where this technology will go in time. Will you need actors? Will you? Yeah, probably. But maybe it's their voice, or maybe Spotify bought a company a couple of years ago or a year ago, which literally takes people's voice. So you can, if you wrote a book and you are the author, it can take your voice for maybe half an hour to an hour, and then it can dictate the entire book using your voice without you having to read it out loud, right? So there's lots of very creative use cases. I met with someone recently who was worried about their art college and said, our art students are freaking out on what they're seeing with AI and what they can do with AI. So yeah, I think Reddit just went public, a company we know really well, but I can't comment on because we may or may not have participated in the IPO. But they have proprietary data, right? They have data that's not available anywhere else on the internet, that's authentic, created by humans. The value of that kind of data will increase. But to answer your question, I think Sora is one of the more interesting use cases in terms of video creation that I've seen most recently.
That's great. Thanks.
Any questions online? So everybody online, please type in chat questions and use that green button at the bottom and type in your questions. I'm sure you have some. I've got one to get us started, which would be more of a negative take, which is, isn't artificial intelligence going to take away jobs? And isn't that bad for the United States?
I think it's an excellent question. I think it will take time. I think it is a big question whether and how much of an impact it will have on jobs. I think it will, and I think it will be. I don't know how meaningful, but it will. But I think it will force the jobs that we have to be those of making decisions and using judgment based on data, and it will remove a lot of mundane, or it will at least reduce the need for mundane jobs or part of our jobs that are mundane, because I don't think that part of the job for most people is enjoyable anyway. But to answer your question, yeah, I do think that's why I worry less about inflation long term, and I worry about the opposite. So, which makes me again bullish on technology, right? Like as an investor, it's like almost a hedge. But yeah, I worry about it. I worry about it. We debate this heavily, even internally. I'm worried about companies like Accenture or other such companies that have large IT services businesses, because you can say these developers are going to be 20% more productive. If they're going to be 20-30% more productive, then won't the customers want 20-30% better pricing? The flip side is AI will create a lot of more work in the short to medium term. So all those IT services companies are going to be really have a lot more demand. And you can see just Accenture reports every quarter, and it's been growing by almost 100% every quarter sequentially, how much work they're having to do with AI, how much more incremental work they have with AI. So, but to answer your question, it is something I worry about. I think, think about how many Uber drivers there are in the world. Will we get to autonomous? I mean, I worry about it. It makes me not worry about inflation long term. It makes me think about companies that are leaning into this. And but I have 2 children in college and one who's younger, and I worry a lot about that generation.
Ashim, we have a question to piggyback on your comments there. Maybe some other industries that will be most impacted in the near and medium. And I know you kind of just touched on this, but any other comments that you would make, positive or negative, in regards to the industries that will be impacted?
It will take a while, but I think healthcare will be the most impacted industry. It will take a while because there's so much regulatory morass, for lack of a better term, in that industry. But whether it's drug discovery, whether it is the amount of data that sits in 50 different silos, I have living in New York, I have 4 different doctors, each with different specialties that belong to different hospital groups, that that data just sits in silos. So just think about in Israel, for example, that doesn't happen, and the data is completely accessible. And we know a private healthcare company that we know the chairman of, that they're accessing that full data set, and they can look holistically across patients' data to see, hey, by the way, did you know this causes this, or causality, and the more data that's measured. So I think healthcare, and Jensen says this in NVIDIA, he says healthcare, he believes, will be the largest vertical. I believe healthcare will be, we'll see a lot of impact of this in time. I think every industry, supply chain will be dramatically. I'm going to a conference next week, a full day. I am meeting with 15 private robotics companies, right? So robotics and the impact of that initially on supply chain, because that's the warehouses and lifting and materials handling is the most obvious place first. But I think robotics will have automation in terms of transportation will have a lot of impact in terms of cars over time. So there's no sector that will, even food. We even talk to companies that we have an investment in a small cap company that is helping companies with AI so that they can figure out what the demand on their restaurant is going to be at a given time for different items based on the data, the seasonality, the weather, the pricing, the competitive environment. So many interesting things happening, but but everything. But technology at the core is going to enable it. All of that's going to be enabled by the layers that we talked through. They're going to be the core, and then the beneficiaries will be so many outside of that. But I learned a long time ago that sometimes the best way to play a trend is to own the picks and shovels. And in many ways, the stack we went through is the biggest picks and shovels opportunity I've ever seen.
Wow. And Ashim, just to piggyback on that, I actually spoke to Laird in the past, and he was mentioning that I forget the company, but essentially how our experience even through a drive-through will in the food industry will change. Are you familiar with?
Yeah, it's the same company that we own. They have a drive-through product, and so when you go to a drive-through, and you will be able to, and they're already testing it. It's not being rolled out yet, but the accuracy has to be higher. But that's the thing with AI is like 97% is not good enough. It has to be 99.9% accurate. And so you will be able to talk to the drive-through operator if you haven't even already given it on mobile, and it won't be an operator that takes your order. It will be a bot, kind of like a chat bot, like Siri, and you will tell it your order, it will confirm it, and then you'll move on. But like that's one less person or half a less person that needs to be taking that order, right? They can just focus on execution versus executing that order versus taking the order.
Fantastic.
You've been very generous with your time. I have one just final question, Ashim. What are you worried or excited about your own career? I mean, the investment career. How is this going to change, and what is Baron doing inside the company to take advantage of artificial intelligence?
So the honest answer would be both, right? It's an exhilarating time to sit at the nexus of what is happening. We are, I cannot, in the 20 years, other than, and remember, I was an internet analyst. I don't think you know that I also started an internet business in '99 at when the internet was really breaking out, right? So I was at that nexus, and I remember every aspect of that vividly. And this is bigger, and so the amount of information that we are absorbing. I wish I had multiple GPUs myself to be able to process the amount of data that is coming in literally every day. So it's exhilarating. It's amazing. Do I worry about just what I just said? If I have one big GPU, like if there's someone who can build 50 big GPUs, can they in time do a lot of what I do and do it better? I would be lying to you if I said I didn't think about what that might be at some point in the future. I just don't know whether it's 10 years away or 20 years away or how long before that happens. But I think at the end of the day, a lot of life and a lot of investing is about decisions and the quality of decisions. And I think what I would impart to you is like the quality of making decisions, how you make decisions. And we think about change. One of my favorite quotes is on my wall by Jeff Bezos, and he said, what's not going to change next? He said, I frequently get the question, what's going to change the next years? I almost never get the question, what's not going to change the next 10 years, right? And so the way I think about the world is that the ability to make really grounded decisions, the ability to, if all the AIs have the same data sets, a similar data set, they're all going to come to the same conclusions. And that's where human behavior comes into it and judgment comes into it. So my hope is that prevails. But in terms of what Baron is doing, we are testing and creating a repository with all our research and testing that. And we have someone kind of leading that effort internally in our tech team. We are using the tools from all our vendors, including Microsoft and Bloomberg. And I'm in the trial. I'm a beta user of the Bloomberg product. I'm a beta user of the FactSet product. So like they also know who to come to because they know that you're going to give them what you're looking for. And so far, I have not been impressed by what I've seen. But and the reason
Makes sense.
why is like the data sets are small. You need much larger data sets. So I'm very optimistic about the future. I think the decisions we will have to do, I will spend less time doing the more mundane parts of my job and more making really thoughtful decisions. And the way I get data and information, I won't be spending an hour every day deleting email, and it will know which emails are the most salient, and maybe I'll spend 20 minutes deleting emails. So I'm an optimist at heart, like Ron. Maybe that's why he hired me. But I believe in the human spirit and judgment. So hopefully that will prevail.
Ashim, great job. Thank you so much. That's a great way to put it.
Thanks, guys. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Very, very honest. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Please follow us on all the social media, LinkedIn, Google, like us on Facebook, follow us on YouTube. We have another presentation coming up in a couple of weeks, and we hope you can join us for that. So Frank and Will, thank you for bringing Ashim to this to us today. One more round of applause. I really appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for your time and expertise. It's great. We overcame the tech challenges at the beginning. We needed our AI to solve our problems. Thanks again. We'll see you guys soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much.